So we've already talked and discussed and showed you the reports coming out that Netanyahu and the Israeli government's infiltration of American influencers, how they're peddling, this propaganda regime to take over TikTok, to facilitate into X, how they're promoting using American influencers, how they're using Larry Ellison to basically purchase these assets so that they can peddle the direction, the narrative to a pro-Israel and very pro-Zionist stance, that anyone interrupting or infuriating or criticizing it is deemed awful and needs to be censored out or needs to be silenced, whatever the case may be. It really just highlights the infinite control that this state has onto a lot of different nations. We talk about a lot of the United States in particular because it's very open on how they're infiltrating American influencers. And let's just show people again where we're talking about this. So Responsible Statecraft showed us that how influencers are being paid by Israel for $7,000 posts. $7,000 posts. Boy. As I stated, maybe I'm in the wrong market. Maybe I gotta rethink things. If I sold myself out. Which, they say that anyone has a price tag on them. So, possibility, but they haven't offered me anything. So I guess I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing and call this out, because it's really just awful that influencers are getting paid $7,000 just to peddle propaganda that they probably don't even know about or have no idea or haven't done any research about it, which is why the whole influence culture just disgusts me. I'm sorry, it's just the whole structure of these influencers, the people that go on social media and just promote garbage propaganda, or they're trying to sell you some corporate item or trying to shift you into a certain direct. Like, it's just so awful. It's so awful. These are just empty vessel people, brainless. They are just bought out like cheap whores to just peddle anything that they're being paid to peddle. And luckily for me, I'm not being paid by any foreign nation, not even my own country, to do this work. So I'm just able to speak freely about all this. That's why I'm just so vague and open about influence culture being so trashy. And the reason for this, the reason behind all this, why they're paying influencers, why they're doing this, obviously, most recently because of the fact that the younger demographic, especially people, I would say 40 and under, are, losing respect on Israel just on the behalf of witnessing the horrific genocide being played out, live streamed, and shared across social media. It's losing touch with the younger demographic, and they already, they lost Democrats, they're losing independents. They were losing a lot of Republicans, which is also a suggestion on why someone like Charlie Kirk was unfortunately targeted for that specific reason. But it goes further back than that. And this is something that has been drove into their, logic, into their prophecy of the formation of Israel, that we have to go after nations to perceive a propaganda that allows us to facilitate our, colonization, our project of taking control of Palestine. So as Pat Ryan pointed this out, the Jewish billionaires imported Muslims to the West. The Zionists used the Islamists as a hammer. Thank God for the under 35 crowd sees the truth. So what he's saying there is that under the guise of the billionaire class, which we know we've already talked extensively about how they play into mass immigration and how they play into refugees, and how people like George Soros wrote letters to the UK opening the floodgates for borders and whatnot. He's saying the same people that are doing this are also the same people that are very staunchly pro colonization of the Palestine region. So they're trying to do this intentionally. They're doing this all intentionally, and they have to trick and manipulate the general public to accept this. And they use the use of mainstream media. They use the use of now influencers, because social media is kind of the new media now, trying to get people, younger demographics on board with this, which I find hilarious because a lot of the so-called influencers just don't have any talent. Like I said, they're empty vessels. They're just whorish beyond belief. They have no self-value. Anyway, so here's this guy here going to explain how they indoctrinate Western countries onto their side. And this is through a process that has been going on for generations.
Israel decided to set up permanent institutional structures to control how Americans would think about the Middle East. In 1983, Israel launched the Hasbara Project, the aim of which was to ensure good press in the U.S. media. The goal was to train Israeli diplomats in communications and public relations. For example, they trained press officers in Israeli consulates in the U.S. to ensure that American journalists would write stories favorable to Israel. As one of these press officers said in the 1980s, he had breakfast, lunch, and dinner with journalists, and that a typical day would involve conversations with producers at leading news and TV talk shows about the content of the program. He described it as, in fact, quote, a joint formulation of ideas. This targeting of the American media goes on in the present day.
The abuse against a journalist is something you just have to take into account. If you both literally and metaphorically, if you work in the Middle East, you've got to take the sticks and stones. What I object to is that my American colleagues don't seem to be prepared to do that.
And even in Israel itself, you can find the main daily newspapers, like Haaretz, for example, provides coverage on the ground and analysis, some of which has views on the conflict that would be almost beyond the pale for an American journalist, say at the New York Times, to write.
The main major.
So they made that great point, and I've stated this before. I've stated this to many people, that if you actually want to know the truth about what's going on in Israel, do not take any of our sources. Do not listen to any of our sources, whether it be Canadian media, American media, even the UK or European media, for granted for this information. Go right to the source. Go right to Israeli media, because Israeli media, Haaretz, the Times of Israel, the Jerusalem Post, what have you, they're not afraid to be open. They're not afraid to really, really highlight exactly what the IDF, what Netanyahu, what the intentions are. They're not afraid to just be very open about what they are doing to Palestinians and what they're doing to Gaza. That's how we're able to know a lot of these measures. That's how I was able to know that Netanyahu paid through Qatar funding to pay Hamas to facilitate in Palestine so that they can use them to go after the PLO, divide Palestinians, and use them in a grab and orchestrate a terror attack like we saw on October 7th that Israel was well aware of because of Egyptian intelligence and other intelligence out there, and orchestrate this to ignite a genocide against the Palestinians, which is something that they've always wanted to do since the Nakba, since the formation of this country, since the writing of the Declaration from people like the Rothschilds family and British royalty. Israel didn't come from God. It didn't come from biblical proportions. The modern day Israel came from British elites. It came from the Zionist fascist coalition. They worked with the Nazis. They had a commemorative coin minted with a swastika and the Jewish symbol of David, Star of David, on both sides of the same coin. That's what Zionism is. Zionism is not related to Judaism. It's related to Nazism, if you can really think about it. And the reason I know that is because Israeli presses point that out. We don't have any of that in the West because, as you can see here, they're infiltrating foreign media outlets outside the country using Mossad, using the CIA, using MI6 to collaborate and propagandize the rest of the world into their pursuit through Project Hasbara.
Television news networks and newspapers in the United States have long ago got their fear to be supreme over their duties as journalists. They are not monitoring the centers of power when it comes to the relationship between America and the Middle East, Israel and America and the Arabs and the Palestinians. They will not ask the right questions. They will not report it using the correct words. They will not confront the reality, and they've given up. And I think once you acquire fear, it's very difficult to get rid of it.
Once you get people feared up and riled up, that's the great motivator for anyone to think irrationally. And that's why they were able to orchestrate, all these wars for the last 20, 30 years. Why do you think we were in Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria and Libya and bombing all these countries left, right, and center for all this time? Because the American media, the Canadian media, the UK media, the Western Hemisphere has lied to you. And they've also lied to you about Israel, because Israel plays a factor into the mass manipulation of media circles. And they put fear into journalists that you're not allowed to question, you're not allowed to ask, you're not allowed to follow up, you're not allowed to use certain words, even if it comes directly from Israel themselves. As I said, you want to know more about this conflict and what's really going on, go right to Israeli media. Don't trust our word. Don't trust anything that our governments, our media is saying. Go right to the source. Go right to the horse's mouth, and you can see exactly what is being played out. That's not about the hostages, that Hamas is a creation of Israel, the same way that the Mujahideen, Al-Qaeda, and ISIS is a formation of America. We're also not being told that, because who infiltrates our media? The CIA. Who infiltrates the UK media? MI6. And who collaborates with Mossad to build up this colonization, this, aircraft carrier, if you will, as RFK Jr. would say, is MI6 and CIA. They partner up with Mossad, with British royalty, to colonize Palestine, specifically in that region, to take control of the Middle East. That's why all this exists. And anyone that looks at, the biblical proportion, and they say that, well, Jesus promised us the land, God wants us here, we're the chosen people, whatnot. That's not for the modern state of Israel. That's not what's happening right now, because what's happening right now is completely different than your so-called biblical prophecies. And you can argue about theology all you want till you're blue in the face. It doesn't excuse the situation that we're in right now. And it's because we're being lied to and manipulated in this way. And some of you remember this, as Censored Man points out, or Censored Men, Netanyahu in the 80s, this is the 1980s we're talking about, brags about how the Jewish lobby controls America. We own the Senate, the Congress, and we have a record-strong Jewish lobby on our side. We have a strong influence over the general support. America won't force us into anything. That was in the 80s, he said that. And people online demonizing Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and Dave Smith, who's a Jewish comedian, or Max Blumenthal, a Jewish journalist, or anyone else that brings attention to this. Oh, they're crazy. They're anti-Semitic. You're telling me that Jewish lobby controls America? Well, again, listen to the horse's mouth themselves stating it. Netanyahu is confirming that a Jewish lobby controls American politics, especially foreign affairs. But no, it's crazy that people now are mentioning about it. Tucker Carlson, or whatever they friggin' call him. Idiots like Laura Loomer, who never state this. That somehow I'm able to point this out as a smart-ass Canadian in his basement on a shoestring budget podcast. I'm able to figure out, but Laura Loomer can't? And all these other idiots on social media, they can't? Oh, that's right. Because they're a bunch of empty vessels. They're whores. They're influencers. They want that $7,000 because they have nothing else to do. They have no talent. They have no journalistic integrity. But here it is. Here's Netanyahu confirming that in detail.
אבל אנחנו הולכים למסלול התנגשות עם הממשל האמריקאי. ארצות הברית זה לא מקשה אחת. זה לא מקשה אחת. יש את הסנאט, יש את הקונגרס, יש את הכוח היהודי שהוא עצום, יותר חזק
I guess I should read this for listening purposes. So the reporter asked, we don't have America with us. They don't support Israel. USA is not a unified bloc. We have the Senate, the Congress, and the record-strong Jewish lobby on our side. We have a strong influence over the general support in America. America won't force us into anything. And the last guy to mention about how this Jewish lobby should be signed up under the FARA agreement, meaning the Foreign Relations Agency, just to be recognized as a foreign agent, unfortunately is no longer with us because he got gunned down in Dallas. And that man was JFK. Just wanted to point that out. JFK was the last person in national spotlight to highlight this. And he got gunned down in Dallas. That's again a theory that there's a connection there. I can confirm nor deny it, but there you go. That's Benjamin Netanyahu stating that. So anyone going after people that bring attention to this or mention the fact that AIPAC controls politicians in America, or this control within Canadian politicians, or this mass control of politicians around the... Again, you heard it from the horse's mouth itself. You heard it from the source. This is Israel speaking directly in the 80s about this. It was very well documented that they have control over countries, over jurisdictions, over legislations around the world. And someone brought this up. So they did a whole Grok AI breakdown of all the times that Israel has used and facilitated a terror plot or facilitating fear into people to stoke this kind of fear-mongering campaign, this blackmail, manipulative control, so that countries would be on their side. So someone highlight this, says the first systemic use of terrorist tactics in the region. I'm not going to go through all of this because it's fairly lengthy, but I just want to highlight some points here. The Ergon deliberately employed methods now recognized as terrorist tactics, bombing of civilian areas, assassinations, and intimidation campaigns, both by British authorities and Arab civilians. The 1937-1939 campaign included marketplace bombings in Haifa, Jaffa, and Jerusalem. So those are Palestine areas. The King David Hotel bombing in July of 1946, targeting the British administrative headquarters in Jerusalem, killed 91 people of mixed nationalities, British, Arabs, and Jews. So they purposely, meaning the Zionists, bombed this hotel that had British administration, Arabs, and Jewish people in the same location. But of course, they put the blame onto Palestinians. They put the blame onto Arab nations. But as you can see here, they were all in the same building, in the same hotel. Ergon units also participated in the Deir Yassin massacre in April 1948, which spread panic among Palestinian Arab communities. These operations marked the first organized use of sustained urban bombings in West Asia, predating similar tactics later employed by nationalist and Islamic groups in the wider region. That almost sounds like the terrorist groups that we're fighting are a creation from people like Israel that got their tactics from the British. It's almost like a domino effect where we're just passing along the torch of terrorism tactics to facilitate fear and control and manipulation onto people. Wow. Really kind of makes you understand how the world works, right? No wonder they will never tell this in Western Hemisphere. You tell this to a random person in America, they have no idea about this. But I'm sure Israeli media publish this constantly. I'm sure it's in their history books. I'm sure people have been raised on this. And they taught this in schools. But at the same time, they're going to propagandize you to tell you that, no, we got to go after the poor brown people. We got to go after the families. We got to go after the children. Innocent children that are playing soccer and attending school and no different than any other children. We got to target them because they might grow up to do something like this. The second part here, founders of Israel acknowledge it was terrorism. Even Israel's founding leaders recognize Iran's tactics of terrorism. This guy here, Meshem Begin, commander of the Ingram, later Prime Minister of Israel, admitted in his memoir that what they did there was terrorism. The hotel bombing, all of it was terrorism, which by definition it would be. That you're putting cause massive violence to a group of people for a theological or political reason. And that's what they did. They did to manipulate people so that the forces commanding the settler of Israel allowed for the expansion of the territory. David Ben-Gurion, Israel's first prime minister, openly condemned activities during the 1940s as terrorism, stating in 1948, the IZL and Stern Gains are terrorist organizations and their actions are terrorist actions. So they know what they're doing. And yet they're still doing the same actions because that mindset got programmed into people, got programmed into the Zionist cult that's behind all this, and indoctrinating people generation after generation to have this mindset that they're the chosen people, that laws don't apply to them, that this is God's will, that you have to do this. And this is not an act of terrorism, this is an act of defense. And anyone that subjugates us or criticizes us, they're the awful ones. They're the terrorists. They're the ones that need to be dealt with. And how many times, how many police reports have we seen of Zionists attacking, say, Jewish rabbis? How many times have we seen that happen? All the times we've seen anti-Semitic on the rise. You see those reports. But how many times have you seen a Zionist attacking rabbis in newspaper headlines or in articles or in breakdowns? I see it all the time on social media before X kind of turned the cheek. You see it before. You've seen all the videos. There's never a call for that. Which I'd find that anti-Semitic. You're attacking a Jewish rabbi. Here's another one. Regional president. By institutionalizing urban bombings, selective assassinations, and massacres as political tools, the Ergen created a template later adapted across the Middle East. So, they're like the modern day architectures of terrorism. So if you want to know where the formation of these groups come from, which a lot of people don't. Surprisingly, a lot of people don't want to know where terrorism comes from. They know how awful it is. They can, say Al-Qaeda and ISIS and Hamas off their tongue like no tomorrow, but they never do the research to find out where they came from, where they get their tactics, where they're getting their people, where their money is coming from. Because if you understand all of this, then you realize that the people telling you who the enemy is, they are the enemy. Netanyahu is the enemy. The United States is the enemy. Canada is the enemy. The UK is the enemy. And they're coordinating together to do more wrongful doings, not only to the people of Palestine, but to you. To you. Because none of these people give a damn about anyone lower than them. These are narcissistic, self-entitled, insane psychopaths that don't give a crap about anyone. So, in conclusion, the Irgun was not the first armed group in the West Asia, but it was arguably the first to introduce systematic urban terrorism into the region. Its bombings of marketplaces and hotels, its use of fear to achieve political goals, and its leaders' own administrations fit the definition of terrorism. Even David Ben-Gurion, Israel's first prime minister, described their operations as such. And that has kept going to right now. And that's the only reason that Israel still remains. That's the only reason that supposed allied nations still contribute to Israel, is because of fear, because of intimidation, because Mossad and all these heinous individuals, they have control over people. They're stealing information. They're blackmailing people. They're using Jeffrey Epstein as one of their agents. That's why they're able to do all this and keep it going for so long. It's not for the safe space of Jewish people, because Jewish people are being threatened in Israel right now. Christians are being threatened. Anyone that steps foot that is not in lockstep with Zionism has a target on their back. And they're demonizing rabbis, they're demonizing people for mentioning about this. And I mentioned rabbis because there's a lot of actual Jewish people, real Jewish people, that are against this, that have been vocal about this, including this guy who went into TRT World denouncing the connection of Judaism and Zionism. And this is from a rabbi telling you about this. So I trust him on this, because who better to talk about the theology than one of its, members of the pastor, one of its people of the synagogue. And here he is going to explain how Zionism, the Zionist coalition of Israel, is not connecting to Judaism, the theology. So listen to this.
Because we're Jews, it's being done in our name. We have to stand up and yell. It's not anti-Semitism to be against Zionism. On the contrary, we are attacked. Even when I went out in New York, so the car tires were slashed, the windows, the mirrors broken, and so forth. But we don't care. We're going out anyway. Wherever there is a large Jewish community, wherever there's a very religious Jewish community, even if it's not large, they will be in opposition to the existence of the Zionist state of Israel, because it is antithetical to Judaism. Zionism is a movement that started around 150 years ago. That's just relatively recently. And it's a movement of people who were totally estranged from the Jewish religion. They were nationalists. They weren't practicing the religion as a whole. And they wanted just a convenient community, a land, a nation that they should feel comfortable and proud of themselves. The Jews never attempted, even though we went through hardships, the Inquisition, the Crusades, and we suffered a lot, but we never attempted to reestablish a Jewish sovereignty, a Jewish nationhood, a Jewish kingdom, because we know it's verboten, it's forbidden. It's just not acceptable, according to Judaism, to have our own state. Remember, the religion is 3,000 years ago. But 2,000 years ago, we were sent into exile by God. We have to be loyal citizens in every country we reside. And we're not to attempt to leave exile, because it's a godly declared exile. Jews lived with a distinctly different religion than the Muslims, but it was never a problem. In fact, it was more than that. The Muslims took in the Jews by the Inquisition, where they tried to torture Jews to convert to Christianity. It was the Muslim countries that embraced the Jews and took them in, and the Jews were able to flourish. They realized, in order to get a lot of massive support from the world, evangelistic Christians, Jews who don't know the Torah, don't know their laws, who don't practice the laws, so they knew they'll go to Palestine and they'll be able to tell everybody, oh, this is the God-given land to the Jewish people. They automatically started breaching and transgressing the laws of the Torah, not to kill and not to steal, not to oppress a people, because they wanted to make their national home in a land that was inhabited by the Palestinian people. Now, right at the beginning, when they said, oh, it's an empty land. And if anybody stood up against them, they said, because you hate the Jews and you're an anti-Semite. They treat us like the worst terrorists in the world. When a boy or girl turns 17, they become a criminal, even if they're not demonstrating, because we refuse to serve in the IDF. They yell at me as a Holocaust denier when my grandparents were killed in Auschwitz. My father escaped Hungary when the Nazis came in. My father was in Auschwitz. Almost the entire families were wiped out. I live and breathe Holocaust. How dare they claim that we're Holocaust deniers? But that's just part of that, the vile Zionism, that they have the power of the most expensive PR and the power of AIPAC that influences, put pressure on politicians to be silent. That is what they're afraid of. The people who stand up and reveal the truth, that Judaism is beautiful, and we live together with Muslims, and we are thankful to Muslims, and we don't want what's happening to the Palestinians. We cry with the Palestinian suffering. That is what they're afraid of. The world will wake up.
There you go. Kudos to that guy. Kudos, and I agree with everything you stated there. I mean, how can you not? It's a Jewish rabbi who's not only mentioning about like his personal beliefs of this, but he's, mentioning the Torah. He's mentioning about, the actual religious prophecies from Judeo values by like the Jewish faith. Same with the Christian faith. Like, is this what Jesus wanted? Did Jesus want you to commit a massacre and kill off, innocent children for his return, that he's going to save you from the rapture if you go and become a murderous psychopath? No, it doesn't make sense. But it does make sense if you're a sociopathic, billionaire elitist that just wants control of territory and is using, theology to your disposal to keep it going. And that's what we're seeing here. I mean, you even saw the videos of the rabbis being attacked themselves. Again, to all the influencers out there and to the people that care so much about anti-Semitism, where's the calls on this? Why aren't you, crying and find this vile? You're beating up Jewish rabbis and people, 18-year-olds that don't want to serve in the IDF. They're being penalized right now. And they're Jewish. They're Jewish people. They're being penalized by the Zionist movement. Why are you not sticking up for them and calling that anti-Semitic? Oh, that's right, because they're not the right kind of Jewish person. The right kind of Jewish person is the Zionist cult behavior, this mentality, not Judaism, not Christianity, not the original implications of these religions. And this is why I don't really get into theology. I'm kind of the exile member of theology. I was raised a Christian Methodist, which to this day, I don't even know what that really means. Even though I was in Sunday school till I was about, 10 years old, I think. I still don't know what it means. And kind of just got pushed out because, I thought the whole prosperous of, Jesus Christ and, all these religions, the common practice was supposed to be about love and kind and compassionate. And here we are. And it just seems like we're never ending wars because the people who want these wars, the psychopaths that are demanding and manufacturing the aggression, have taken on themselves to use theology as bait. Like, hey, you got to slaughter Palestinians in the name of the Jewish faith. No, that's not what Jews practice. That's not what's in the Torah. That's completely different from what Judeo-Christian ethics have taught you. Even the notion of Judeo-Christian ethics is kind of misleading. If you look at the Bible, if you look at the New Testament, if you look at the Torah, you look at all these different prospects and faith. Like, it's just so crazy. But it's because of the infiltration of these monsters using theology to enhance their wrongdoings and bait people into this. It's just absolutely sinister. There's no other word to say. It's like, it's sinister to try to use, and don't get me wrong, there's, obviously in the Muslim world, it's the same thing where you got the certain types of Arabs that go after each other and Islam and this and that. So this is the problem with a lot of religious institutions, that they've been corroded, they've been corrupted to use in the worst way possible, and it's completely different from what the original teachings are about, which is about love and compassion, supporting one another, going after the money exchangers. We don't even hear that anymore in Christianity. But that was one of the things that Jesus supposedly taught people. And I want to believe that someone said about that, but it gets droned out by the mass amount of corruptions. So kudos on him for saying that. And here's something else too. There's more of him speaking about it. Here's from Torah Jews stating Zionism is essentially incompatible with Judaism. A packed stadium at Barclays Center today with tens of thousands of anti-Zionist Jews gathered to celebrate the legacy of our grand rabbi, Rav Yoel Tebodam of blessed memory. We will never bow of an idiom of the Torah and never stop fighting the onslaught of Zionism. So this is from last December. I think we showed this before, but I just want to highlight again. This is a stadium full of people, of Jewish people. We can turn now. This is a full-packed sports stadium of Orthodox Jews and Jewish rabbis. Look at this. Filling the entire stadium. In support of this guy who did not support modern day Israel and had solidarity with Palestinians. Look at that. Look at that. Jam-packed. So what would the influencers say about this? Because I know people like Ben Shapiro will look at this and say, oh, they're a bunch of self-haters. An entire stadium full of Jewish people. Yeah, they're all self-hating. I'm sure that's the case. But what would Emily Austin, that brat, would say about this? Is she going to denounce them and say, oh, well, they're not really Jewish? Or I don't believe that, or that's an AI, or that's a fake. But that literally happened. And there's a lot more of people like this that are denouncing the genocide and calling for solidarity, because what's happening is the Zionists are using Judaism in a defaming name, and they're wrecking the whole intention of Judaism, which is why anti-Semitism is on the rise, which is why Zionists prefer anti-Semites than this. They rather have anti-Semites roaming around causing mayhem because it gives them more of an opportunity and power to play the victim than it would be to be solidary to the original teachings of their religion. That's what's happening. That is why people are calling this out. And that's why even Israelis, we showed you, protesting Netanyahu. It's not because they, are not Jewish enough or self-haters or whatever crap that spews out of people like Ben Shapiro. It's because they know that their actual religion is being purposely infiltrated by Zionists. And that's a totally separate issue. That's a totally separate political philosophy. It's not a religion. It's not anything to do with Judaism. It's a prophecy designed by the British, by the Rothschilds, by British monarchy, and so on, in hopes to colonize the Middle Eastern territories to rule superior over this area of the world. And that's why they use the name, God's chosen people. They're superior. They're promised this land 2,000 years ago. Even the rabbi stated that, Jews had, harsh upbringings with all the Crusades and Auschwitz and the Holocaust and whatnot. Well, isn't it kind of amazing that the Holocaust survivors are being silenced out of this conversation? You would think you want to hear more from them about what they think about Israel and Palestine, considering the fact that they fled from, harsh discrepancies of the Third Reich from Germany. You think you want to hear from them, but no, they get silenced out. And yet you get advice from Rabbi Dildo or Ben Shapiro or who's the other one that I saw recently? The guy that said I only got spot on once. Officer Tatum. These so-called influencers who don't have a spine or apparently a brain to do critical analysis and thoughts. But they will sell out for $7,000 to do a bunch of posts that they don't even know what they're talking about. Which, hey, maybe I could consider going that direction, but considering no one's reached me an offer, I guess I'll keep doing what I'm doing and, being my own person. Because that's what it means to not be a sellout. Because no one's paying me jack squat. Not Israel, not Qatar, not Palestine, not Gaza, not any Arab nation, not even our nations. This is just all me. And all me is allowed to say whatever I want until someone tries to silence me out, which I'll just put the disclaimer out there. I have no notion to self-harming myself. I have no notion to self-delete myself. And no one's going to try and take this away from me. If they try to take this away from me, let's just say you'll have to rip this microphone out of my cold, dead hands. And I'm serious about that. Because I've worked damn hard to keep this channel going. I've worked damn hard for what I do, and very vocal and supportive of, Canada, whatnot. And nobody is going to try and silence this guy down. No one.